Throughout the 1950s and up to the 1970s, the Italian Army had been using a variety of American surplus tanks, such as M47s, and had even manufactured a large number of M60s domestically under license. Despite the various upgrades carried out on the M47 by OTO Melara, the tank was still outdated, and the German Leopard was much better suited to Italian needs and wants. Several hundred Leopards ended up being used by Italy, with some supplied directly by Krauss Maffei, and others built domestically under license. Work on an export vehicle was being carried out jointly by both Germany and Italy, the Lion project, which ended at the prototype stage in the late 1970s when the German side withdrew. By 1980, with the end of Leopard production in Italy, OTO Melara still wanted to be able to offer a tank for export, mainly to Middle Eastern nations, something expressly prohibited within the terms of the Leopard license. Welcome to another Tank Encyclopedia voiced article. I'm your host Wood, and today I'll be covering the OF40. If you like what we do and want to see more, please consider hitting that subscribe button so you don't miss a single video. If you are already subscribed, please stay that way. If you'd like to contribute more directly, please consider donating to our Patreon or PayPal. It helps us stay afloat. The Carro da Combattimento Medio OF40 was the product of an Italian consortium of OTO Melara, La Spezia, responsible for the bulk of the manufacturing, and Fiat, responsible for the automotive components. It is from this collection of companies that the name is derived. O stands for OTO Melara, and the F for Fiat, while the 40 relates to the weight, 40 tons. Although commonly referred to as a main battle tank, the sales literature from OTO Melara categorizes the vehicle as a medium battle tank. The first prototype of the tank was completed by 1980 and very quickly passed trials. It was then purchased by the UAE, and deliveries began in 1981. With the experience gained from the Leopard and Lion manufacturing, it is no surprise that the OF40 possesses more than a passing resemblance to the Leopard 1A4, and it does in fact use some components from it, although it is not a copy. The German firm that manufactured the Leopard even sent engineers to examine the OF40 in case it was violating their license, but were satisfied that it was different enough. The main armament of the OF40 is the OTO Melara 105mm L52 rifled gun, mounted in the turret with a semi-automatic breech and spring recuperator. This gun is not the same as the Royal Ordnance 105 L52, but it is very similar, and the ammunition is compatible. Alongside the big gun is a 7.62mm coaxial machine gun, a second 7.62mm machine gun mounted on the turret roof for anti-aircraft purposes, and a battery of 4 smoke projectors on each side of the turret. The 105 can fire high-explosive anti-tank, high-explosive squash head, and armor-piercing discarding sabot ammunition, all fired electrically. Other NATO-compliant 105 ammunition can also be used, such as smoke and canister, although both the commander's sight and gunner's sight only carry ranging scales for APDS, heat, and HESH. The gun could be fired at a maximum rate of 9 rounds per minute. Elevation and depression for the main gun was -9 to 20, and the maximum range for the gun was cited for 6,000 meters. The coaxial could, if need be used to assist in ranging, as it was matched along ballistically to the main gun. 19 rounds for the main gun were carried in the turret, along with 2,500 rounds for the machine guns. A further 42 rounds for the main gun was carried in an ammunition rack in the front left of the hull, and an additional 3,000 rounds of ammunition for the machine guns was also carried in the hull. A useful feature for the vehicle was that the commander could take control of the gun with his own equipment. He could then target, aim, and fire the gun independently of the gunner. The turret was made from plates of welded rolled homogeneous steel armor, using spaced armor in critical areas. The turret rotated around its ring on steel ball bearings up to 22.5 degrees per second. Just like the turret, the hull was also made from rolled homogeneous with some spaced armor thrown in. The crew compartment was separated from the engine. The driver was seated in the front right with the ammunition stowed in the hull to his left. The 7 wheel stations each had double wheels, and were connected via swing arms to torsion bars. The first 3 and last 2 swing arms were fitted with telescopic dual-action hydraulic shock absorbers and conical springs, which prevented the wheels from deflecting too far and causing damage to the bar or arm. Drive was delivered to the tracks by a rear drive sprocket. Wheels, sprocket, and shock absorbers were all derived from the M47, not the Leopard, as one might have expected. The gunner was equipped with a laser rangefinder and an 8x optical telescope, and the commander's position was fitted with a panoramic periscope with an optional stabilized sight for target surveillance and acquisition. Episcopes were also provided for the crew, with 8 for the commander, 1 for the gunner, 2 for the loader, and 3 for the driver. An additional night driving sight was also available. The OF40 was equipped with a license-built Fiat V10 diesel, delivering 850 horsepower and connected to a fully automatic gearbox with a hydraulic torque converter. The gears were electrically selected with options for 4 forward and 2 reverse. In the event of an electrical failure, a manual override could be used for the second gear. The 1,000 liters, or 220 gallons, of diesel held on board was sufficient for up to 600 kilometers, or 370 miles, for on-road driving with a top speed of 60 kilometers per hour. The hull was fitted with an automatic fire extinguishing system and an escape hatch in the floor. Nuclear, biological, and chemical agent filters and an overpressure system were fitted along with a fume extractor for the crew. Bilge pumps were also fitted to ensure the tank could clear out any water coming into the hull. The OF40 Mark I was a capable tank, better than the basic Leopard 1, and free from any export problems. It was the ideal tank for Italy to try and sell. The OF40 was offered for sale to Spain and Greece, and was demonstrated in Egypt too. Despite all these efforts and the interest it generated, only the UAE purchased any. Now we've covered the Mark I, let's cover the Mark II, though there aren't many differences. The OF40 Mark II was released shortly after the Mark I, being trialed in August 1982. The Mark II was optimized for fighting in the desert and had several of the Mark I's deficiencies rectified. Most important was the addition of fully stabilized sights. Since the Mark II's gun was also fully stabilized, this gave it the ability to fire on the move. The optical equipment and fire control systems of the Mark I were seen as too austere, so therefore the Mark II was given a slew of additional electrical and optical devices. The Mark II featured the same panoramic sight for the commander as the Mark I, except that it was self-stabilized during panoramic search and also matched to the gun for firing. The gunner's primary sight was also the same as on the Mark I, except it featured a stabilization system with weather sensors. The Mark II also featured a laser rangefinder with a range of 10 kilometers or 6 miles and an optional low-light level television camera with a monitor and additional firing computer. Despite the improvements to the 105mm, the UAE wanted a tank with a 120. Although the 120 L44 smoothbore developed years later for the C1 Ariete could be fitted to the OF40, this development came too late, as a modified OF40 hull with an Ariete turret was tested in the UAE in 1988. Such a change, if implemented in the original turret, would have created a lot of issues with the fire control systems and ammunition storage anyway. The redesigned internal stowage allowed only 15 rounds for the main gun to be carried in the turret, with 2,500 rounds for the machine guns. The OF40 Mark II's turret was made of rolled homogeneous, just like the Mark I. However, the design of the Mark II's turret eliminated the shot traps present in the Mark I and added a ballistic protector to protect the turret ring. Because of the turret redesign, the Mark II had a slightly slower traverse rate than the Mark I, taking an additional half second for a full rotation. The OF40 Mark II is equipped with the same V10 Fiat diesel as the Mark I, but is rated for only 830 horsepower, not 850. The Mark II featured 2 liquid coolers with thermostatically controlled fans, specifically designed for desert conditions. There were also additional tropicalization features added for the controlling of the fuel supply to prevent overheating and a cyclone filter to ensure the air intake remains dust-free. Several variants of the OF40 are known to exist, built using modified versions of the chassis. The OF40 Armored Recovery Vehicle was developed specifically for the UAE and featured a bulldozer blade and a crane capable of lifting 18 tons. The Palmaria SPG was a modified OF40 hull with an APU, a new turret, and a 155mm gun. About 185 were produced. Despite the improvements, the UAE were unhappy with the OF40 and it was replaced with the French Leclerc. Only 39 OF40s were manufactured in total, some of which were test beds, much less than even the SPG variant it was based on. This concludes another Tank Encyclopedia voiced article. Thank you for watching, and please consider subscribing if you haven't already. What do you think of the OF40? Was it a good tank? Should the UAE have kept it in service? Was it awful, and should Italy have just stuck with the Leopard 1? Let us know in the comments and keep us in your sights.